Back in 2016, I covered my most fitting guest characters in fighting games, and it's funny how much things have changed since then. Fighting game guests used to be less common, usually just with a few series doing them consistently, or some only bringing in guest characters that were essentially a joke or Easter egg. Now, it feels like every fighting game eventually recruits a guest for that extra exposure. However, it's actually a pretty good idea. Not only does it help advertise to fans outside the fighting game's fan base, but it seems that most modern developers are interested in finding characters that truly fit into the universe, both in terms of tone and how their moveset works, which was not always the case with the older game guests. Like, even in my questionable fighting game guest list, most of those games had other guest characters that felt perfect, and even the more dubious guests were still fun, they just were a bit odd. So to show how much fighting game guests have changed, I'm going to take a look at the best guests in modern fighting games. By modern, I mean any characters that were released after my original video, so the arbitrary start date is May 14th, 2016. And unlike my questionable guest character video from 2023, where it mostly covered a few guilty franchises of questionable guests, there are so many good fighting game guests across many series nowadays, I'm just doing one series per entry. Now, let's invite in the top 10 best guest characters in modern fighting games. Number 10, Ryu and Chun-Li from Street Fighter in Power Rangers Battle for the Grid. The Power Rangers fighting game was perseverant, starting off small and silent in 2019, but building up a full-on roster with a voice cast of mostly the original actors by the end. In one of the DLC drops, the game added in Ryu and Chun-Li with mechanics somewhat based on their Street Fighter V iterations, but since they were adhering to the mechanics of this game, they felt more like Marvel vs. Capcom Ryu and Chun-Li, since their movements were a lot faster and they can do air combos while bouncing the opponent high off the ground. The reason for having these two in the game was simply good corporate relations. The former Street Fighter director Yoshinori Ono was a big Power Rangers Sentai fan and worked with the developers when they were working on the mobile game Power Rangers Legacy Wars to get some Street Fighter characters in that game in 2018. It started with Ryu and Chun-Li, and to promote the crossover, Power Rangers did a 7-minute video explaining how Ryu and Chun-Li met the Rangers. They didn't explain how they got to this universe, but that's okay since M. Bison has teamed up with Rita Repulsa, so that gives Ryu a chance to get a power coin from Tommy the Green Ranger, and now he has a Ranger costume to go along with his standard powers. Chun-Li also got a Ranger outfit, but not in the video since it wasn't ready yet, so you have the returning Rangers, Ranger Ryu, and then just regular Chun-Li. Don't worry, she got something off screen. As Battle for the Grid got content, they eventually used their rights to the Street Fighter characters in 2021 as DLC. I like the extra effort in the designs. Not only did they have their own Ranger costumes, but they had stylized street clothes designs that were ripped right out of the 90s. Their armor designs were also original outfits with some references to Power Ranger and Sentai history. Ryu was the Crimson Hawk Ranger, partially based on Red Hawk of the Jetman Sentai team, which has an extra layer since Red Hawk's civilian name was also Ryu. Chun-Li was the Blue Phoenix Ranger, partially based on the Ho-Oh Ranger from the Dai Ranger Sentai series, which was also Phoenix themed and had some Chinese culture inspiration in the design. And the best parts of these designs are Ryu's gloves and black belt are still visible, and Chun-Li's bracelet and lower outfit half are showing. For any Chun-Li costume, you need to see her thighs. In battle, it's what you'd expect. Ryu has his Hadouken, Shoryuken, and Tatsumakis, and Chun-Li has her Kikoken, lightning kicks, and leg slams. But as mentioned, their moves fit the mechanics of the game, so you're experiencing them in a new way. You've played Ryu and Chun-Li a dozen times, but never like this.
You're done! You can't escape! The secret to strength is daily training.
Number 9. Haomaru from Samurai Showdown in Soul Calibur 6. Soul Calibur is the king of fighting game guest characters in my opinion. They had creative guests in Soul Calibur 2, headlined by Link from Legend of Zelda getting a lot of people into the series in general because of his guest appearance, and from then on, there was always hype behind whatever guest there would be when a new Soul Calibur game was announced, except in 3 which had no guest. But ignoring that one, they always brought new genres to the table. Soul Calibur 4 had Star Wars characters, the PSP version had Kratos from God of War, the Wii spin-off had Lloyd from Tales of Symphonia, and 5 had Ezio from Assassin's Creed. So as you can see, they go in all directions when looking for a guest, with Soul Calibur 6 being no different with its 3 guests. On the base roster, they gave us Geralt from The Witcher, who I like the moveset of. The magic that would power up his attacks set him apart from other characters on the roster. The second guest was 2B from Nier Automata, who was on my questionable guest list, but is still a well-made fighting game character. And finally, in the last batch of DLC, we got a character that was a slam dunk of a guest, Haomaru from the Samurai Showdown series. It almost makes too much sense. You have the main character from the main weapon-based fighting game on a 2D plane, and you bring him into the main weapon-based fighting game on a 3D plane. Obviously, he works visually, a rugged samurai with a sword and sake. He's like Mitsurugi if he chilled out more. And he's got all of his moves from the Samurai Showdown games, but adjusted for the more combo-heavy nature of Soul Calibur. He's got his tornado, the rapid slashes, the move where he does a flip, but some of these moves can chain together unlike in his game of origin. He also has his rage meter from Samurai Showdown in this game, which is when characters' health goes low enough, they turn red and get access to some super moves. You also get more tricks when you do his soul charge that all Soul Calibur characters have, so eventually you'll have access to all of Haomaru's moves. You just gotta work for it. And then there's other odds and ends of Samurai Showdown flair in there with the visuals. If there's any criticism I have, and it's not a problem since I love having him in the game, but I would have liked to see how a different Samurai Showdown character would have been adapted. Haomaru is great, but he tends to be the go-to when Samurai Showdown has a crossover, like in Capcom vs SNK or King of Fighters. Show me how Tam Tam would be in a crossover, or Earthquake, or Charlotte. The only other character I could see them picking over Haomaru is Nakoruru, who also appears in a lot of crossovers. So in the end, I'm just happy Samurai Showdown got some love. And if there's anything Samurai Showdown's developer SNK loves doing, it's putting their characters in crossovers, since this is definitely not the last we've seen of SNK characters guest appearing in other games on this list.
Think fast! Worked up a good sweat.
Number 8. Mai Shiranui from Fatal Fury and King of Fighters in Dead or Alive 5 and 6. Mai's inclusion in the Dead or Alive series makes sense on paper. Both the character and the game are known for their more bouncy physics, so it's a match made in heaven, and it worked. Next to Terry Bogard, Mai is probably the next best well-known character from the Fatal Fury and King of Fighters series. You can't imagine either of those games without her, except for that one game that didn't have her. She fights using ninjutsu, fans, and flames in her games of origin, and it's a fun old rush-down time. Mai's always one of my go-to characters. I love when she just lights herself on fire and runs at the opponent. So when I heard that she was in Dead or Alive 5, I actually didn't download her right away. But now's my chance to buy her since Dead or Alive 5 is my preferred way to play the series. Okay, now where is she here? There's her DOA 6 appearance, but where's 5? Oh, but why? They have the license for her in Dead or Alive 6, why can't they just keep the one for 5 active too? And there's no physical release of Dead or Alive 5 from 2016 with her on it like there is for the expired Soul Calibur guests, so is Dead or Alive 5 Mai now unobtainable media? Uh-oh. Anyway, Dead or Alive 6. It had Mai again, but even shinier. Making the jump from a 2D to a 3D plane, it took some getting used to, but once you get moving with her, you see a lot of her classic attacks. You've got her charges, flips, and the extended arm motions with the fans out. You even have her butt bounce in there. And I think it's funny how slow her fan throw is. I feel like you have to try to get hit by it. To me though, the fire in her attacks seems a bit subdued, but it comes out at the right times. Something about the texture of it just doesn't make it feel as dynamic as it normally is in her games of origin, but it still adds that extra sting to her attacks like it's supposed to. Its impact looks more like smoke rather than fire.
Where there is smoke, there is fire. Where there is there is
Her personality is somewhat intact, but I almost feel like she needs to be more silly. Mai may be a sexy character, but she's also pretty goofy, and without anyone from her team or her rivals in the game, she loses a bit of that interaction potential, like when she taunts Andy about their relationship, or brags about how she's the best, which is something I like about the small story she had with Kasumi. Though any attacks that let her do a close-up look at the screen in Dead or Alive are the best to me, since it lets a bit of that boastful personality shine through. She also helped make way for more guests in Dead or Alive, being another King of Fighters character, Kula Diamond, in Dead or Alive 6. Though since I cut short my Dead or Alive 5 portion of the entry, that game also had 4 more guests, being from Virtua Fighter, Akira Yuki, Jackie Bryant, Sarah Bryant, and Pai-chan, all of which were great fits. And before that, Dead or Alive 4 had a Spartan from Halo playable since the game was exclusive to the Xbox 360. The developer of Dead or Alive Temco was hoping to put Master Chief in the game, but since Halo's developer Bungie said that would make no sense for the story, not sure why it couldn't just be non-canon, they had Temco make their own Spartan OC for the game. It shows how far they've come with guest characters, since Mai had no restrictions in Dead or Alive 5 and 6, being able to show that she's the best fighter from Japan one elbow slam at a time. Number 7. Terry Bogard from Fatal Fury and King of Fighters in Fighting EX Layer. The Street Fighter EX games were a series of Street Fighter spin-offs by the gaming company Arika. They were technically not in the mainline Street Fighter series, so when the partnership between the two companies expired, Arika was left with all the non-Street Fighter characters they made for that game. But that's no problem, since they can just release their own game, Fighting Layer, which got nowhere near the attention Street Fighter EX got, and only had 2 returning characters. So it seems the series was done. Or was it? In 2018, Arika dusted off the Street Fighter EX characters that they owned, and made Fighting EX Layer with all the familiar faces returning. It started with a roster of 13 classic characters, and they later added in 4 characters left off the roster as free DLC. But in the middle, the game had a surprise. They revealed SNK found their way into another fighting game and lent Arika one of their main characters, Terry Bogard. And yup, that's Terry. They didn't really have to change much about him. The combo system in Fighting EX Layer is not the same as Fatal Fury or King of Fighters, but the game still has mechanics that chain together attacks and juggles, so this iteration of Terry feels right at home. He's got all of his major special attacks, Rising Tackle, Power Wave, Burning Knuckle, Crack Shoot, along with many of the big super moves, including Buster Wolf, the best Terry super move. I think the only thing he has in this game that he doesn't have in his own games is a silver and gold outfit, which enhances everything about him. As for why Terry's here, I don't know. But maybe SNK was hoping to make Fatal Fury EX with Street Fighter no longer in the partnership, and this was a test run. Though Arika is now busy as a co-developer of Tekken 8, so I'm not sure if that's a possibility right now. But hey, we got more Terry out of this. And Smash Bros included Terry in their game later that same year, unofficially making 2019 the year of Terry Bogard.
Are you okay?
KO!
Nice fight. See you!
Number 6. Baiken from Guilty Gear in Samurai Showdown 2019. The Samurai Showdown reboot was the series' first foray into the world of guest characters. A few of their own characters were guests in various other fighting games or crossovers, shoutouts to Capcom vs SNK, but the 2019 game featured a few characters from other video games entering the universe of Samurai Showdown. Season 2 of DLC gave us 2 guests, being the Warden from For Honor and a character from some mobile game, and Season 3 gave us 2 more, being Hibiki from The Last Blade and Baiken from Guilty Gear. I feel bad for Hibiki since she was going to be the big guest of the season returning from a dead franchise, but then Baiken outshined her. But shoutouts to The Last Blade. It was SNK's other samurai-based fighting game that just never received the attention that Samurai Showdown got. A lot of their characters are cool. If they're never going to get another Last Blade game, I wish they could get a second life in other SNK games like Hibiki did. But on to Baiken. She was the last DLC character released for Samurai Showdown and was a great finale. Guilty Gear was not a series I would have expected to see crossover with Samurai Showdown, since Samurai Showdown is a slower paced game with heavy attacks that don't combo as much, while Guilty Gear is a high-octane combo-heavy fighting game. But when I saw Baiken was going to be the next DLC character, my reaction was, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Baiken's aesthetics work perfectly in Samurai Showdown. Baiken takes inspiration from old samurai movies and anime, which is the entire theme of Samurai Showdown. Baiken also has all of her weapons and attacks from Guilty Gear, but they are slowed down for the game. Her combo potential is reduced, but in exchange, many of her moves have some devastating single-hit damage now. Of course, all of her slashes have that Samurai Showdown style of knocking the opponent down or pushing them back when she gets in a clean hit, but the fun is with all of her weapons, like with her mace on a chain. And sometimes the chain has a grappling hook on the end of it instead. This can be combined with her cannon, which was already a fun move to use on its own, but now it allows for some unique combos. She can go into air combo extension with the two of them, which is not seen often in Samurai Showdown, carrying over a bit of her combo style from Guilty Gear. Though my favorite move is her mat, where she stomps on the ground and it flies up. It covers so much area. I love knocking people out of the air with it. Her other major attacks are more defensive. She's got counters and deflections and a command run, where the command run has a bit of invincibility, so she can absorb some hits and do some slashes out of it for the counter attack. A final note is Samurai Showdown was one of the few games where you could see Baiken smiling on default at the time. People speculate that she was happy that she could finally see her homeland as it was before the Gears attacked that killed her family, so it's like a memory of a more peaceful time for her, even if she's not in her own time period. And regardless of if that's the reason or not, I approve of that headcanon, so let's keep that smile going.
6問は持ったな。ごめん。
勝者バイケン。
国に帰んな。
Number 5. Akira Kazama from Rival Schools in Street Fighter V. Street Fighter has always been pretty strict about their guest characters. They've never had a guest from a series unrelated to their franchise in a mainline game. Before Street Fighter V, the closest we got were characters from the Capcom beat-em-up game Final Fight in Street Fighter. But Final Fight was always just another game in the Street Fighter universe, so I never considered them full-on guests. It was literally called Street Fighter 89 before they renamed it Final Fight. But we got something close enough to a guest character in the final batch of DLC in Street Fighter V. When the last 5 characters were released in 2021, 3 were returning fan favorites, 1 was Luke making his debut, and in the middle we had Akira from the Capcom fighting game Rival Schools. Rival Schools came out towards the end of the Capcom fighting game boom of the 90s, released in 1997 with a sequel. It was on a 3D plane and was a tag team game, where your tag partner would come out for super move assists, healing moves, and other types of power-ups. The big thing that stuck out for this game was it had launching moves that let you do air combos, which was pretty unheard of for 3D fighting games at the time. It was themed around high school students and some of their teachers fighting with a combination of martial arts and extracurricular activities. With its overall theme of down-to-earth fighters with some extraordinary powers, rival schools fit perfectly into Street Fighter, and of all the characters on the roster, Akira was picked for Street Fighter V, which made sense. She wasn't the main character, but she was the leader of her team that had a pretty big role in the story, and had an intimidating appearance when she had her biker gear and helmet on, so she was a good rep for the series. Plus, some of the other main character team appeared in different crossovers in the past few decades, so they were giving some other characters a shot. Though saying that Rival Schools is an out-of-universe guest is a stretch, since there's clear evidence of these two series being in the same universe, like Rival Schools characters Tiffany and Hinata appearing in the background of the Kanzuki Beach stage in Street Fighter V, or Sakura, in her Street Fighter Alpha attire, appearing in Rival Schools as a secret character on the roster, and being friends with Hinata in the Street Fighter comics. Akira touching ground in Street Fighter V was more like these two franchises finally making an official connection rather than a true guest. But regardless, there's still enough differences between the series where you can consider her the first non-Final Fight guest in a mainline Street Fighter game. Another reason to consider her as a guest is her playstyle feels a lot more like Rival Schools than it does Street Fighter. Her main attacks from Rival Schools are adjusted for the 2D plane of Street Fighter, like her Rekka chains or kicks that lead into more kicks, and her special skills turn the Street Fighter mechanics into Rival Schools. Specifically, her second V skill lets her launch the opponent like in her Game of Origin, and then she can jump up for an air combo that no other Street Fighter character can replicate. It's uncanny how well this reflects Rival Schools. And her first V trigger, which uses the game's secondary meter, has her call in her brother Daigo to reference the tag mechanics of Rival Schools, where he jumps in and then releases some energy, and he comes back for her super move, which references the team-up supers, where they perform a tag combo to beat up her foe. In the end, there's a lot of heart put into how much Akira feels like she's in her Game of Origin here, and if Street Fighter ever wants to bring back another Rival Schools character in the future, Akira shows us that Rival Schools mechanics convert very well into the Street Fighter games.
Let's go!
Number 4, Ikuro from Bao in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R. Technically, the original version of this fighting game came out in 2013, but the remastered version of it with more characters, some new voices, and more polish overall came out in 2022. So does it meet the time requirements I set for this video? I'm gonna say yes, solely because I didn't know about the 2013 game when I made the old list, and I just want to talk about it. So I'll say the remastered version is different enough to make it eligible for a loophole. Anyway, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. They made a fighting game based on part 3 of the story in the 90s, then when it was getting its anime adaptation in 2012, they made another fighting game. And then when its anime was in full force, they remastered and upgraded the game with all the anime's voice cast and character designs in 2022. You get all the funky playstyles with characters who summon their stands, or just have other powers depending on the part of the story they're from. With JoJo's being the powerhouse of a franchise it was, fans should recognize every character on the roster, but there was one character from outside the series. His name was Ikuro, and he's infected with the Bao parasite, turning him into a living weapon. So why is he here? Well, JoJo's creator Hirohiko Araki didn't just write JoJo's, he had other manga beforehand. Probably the most notable of his pre-JoJo's work was Bao, the story of a man with amnesia who was turned into a bioweapon named Bao, and wants to uncover his past and prevent the person who turned him into Bao from trying to kill him after he wanders off. Aspects of Ikuro in his Bao form are blueprints for powers we'd later see in JoJo's, so putting him in All-Star Battle made sense, both because he looks like he's right out of the JoJo's universe and it pays homage to Araki's other work. As someone who's watched the Bao OVA from the late 80s, I recognize his attacks. He's got his face-melting acid, his hair stinger projectiles, his electricity, and the giant laser beam he ripped out of the lab. But because there's no lab to rip a laser beam out of in this game, he just pulls it out of nowhere like Joseph's machine gun. And of course, he has the signature stand attack, punching rapidly while making noises, but he did it first. Another quirk to his character is every time he uses one of his powers, he gets his own narration from an unseen person. I don't know if this is supposed to be a manga narrator or the scientist who made the Bao virus, since he explains all of Bao's powers to everyone as he does them in the OVA. Regardless, I like that he has this. It's a fun crossover that reminds me of when Arale shows up in any Dragon Ball media. I'm glad Bao had an opening to reach a modern audience with his appearance in All-Star Battle. Number 3, Geese Howard from Fatal Fury in Tekken 7. Tekken 7 was the series' first full dive into the world of guest characters. We had Gon in Tekken 3, but that always felt like a joke guest character to me. Tekken 7 was the first earnest attempt to get guests that truly fit with the Tekken vibe. 2 of them appeared on my questionable list, but don't let that dictate the quality of their movesets. All guests in Tekken 7 were fun to play. I'm just not sure how much Noctis or Negan really fit with the tone of Tekken. But as for the other guests, they were from other fighting games, so they naturally fit in better. On the base roster of the console version, we had Akuma from Street Fighter, who fit in so well, he was integrated into the story as an assassin. Tekken is all about their martial artists with demon-like powers. However, he actually appeared on my original list from 2016, even though the console version of Tekken 7 wasn't released until July 2016, so I was just so excited for Akuma, I couldn't wait to put him on a list. While I could still include him on this list, I just really want to talk about the other early guest in Tekken 7, since I like him. In 2017, they announced Geese Howard from Fatal Fury and King of Fighters as the next guest, and it was another perfect fit. He's a businessman who also runs an underground crime syndicate and is an expert martial artist who sometimes is the final boss of a tournament that he may or may not be running. That describes like half of Tekken. If the final boss is not a giant scary monster, it's just a corrupt businessman who runs a tournament for power and or arrogance. We don't get a backstory on how or why he's in Tekken, since no DLC characters got story modes outside of trailers, but Geese Howard doesn't need a reason to show up. They can just say it's because he's awesome, and that's basically why. Tekken director Harada is very much a world traveler in real life, basing his characters off people he meets and choosing his guests based on what he likes. He just thought Geese seemed like a good fit and wanted to bring fighting game fans closer together with the crossovers. Being from a 2D fighting game, there were potential challenges to adapt Geese's moveset, but it all felt like a smooth transition. Geese has always been about strong dynamic motions to exemplify his power, so they work in the close combat nature of Tekken. His hand motions and large sweeps can dominate a match, and my favorite attack is his Tendo Kudaki, where he takes a step forward and turns his back to the screen, a wonderful display of arrogance. I love his counter too. Him saying "predictable" is one of my favorite fighting game lines, but what I love the most is he has a super meter in this game, which Akuma also had. Since Geese is from a game with a meter, you can build it up and use it for alternate super moves, mostly involving his Reppuken energy waves. Though if you're real patient and let it fill up all the way, he can go into max mode and make his moves faster or just better in general for combos. They did a great job at how his combos feel like they're straight out of a 2D fighting game. Like moves where he short hops feel very unique to this game. He doesn't really play like a Tekken character, and I think that's neat.
You win. Give in to your fears.
Number 2, Spawn from Spawn Comics in Mortal Kombat 11. Mortal Kombat always goes all in with their guest characters. They got a taste of the guest character bug in Mortal Kombat 2011 by adding in Kratos and Freddy Krueger, and it was a snowball effect from there. The next game, Mortal Kombat X, had my favorite guest character, Predator, perfect fit, along with Jason Voorhees, great moveset, Alien, great tie-in by making it part Tarkatan, which is a species species of monsters in Mortal Kombat, and Leatherface. See my questionable guest character list for my full thoughts there. Jump forward 2 games to their latest game in 2023, Mortal Kombat 1, and you'll see they went in a more violent superhero direction for guest characters. Omni-Man was pretty fun, I like him. And between X and 1, we have Mortal Kombat 11 in 2019, giving us the widest array of genres for guest characters. While the final 2 Mortal Kombat 11 guests appeared on my questionable guest list, being RoboCop and Rambo, I praised both of them for being incredibly fun to play, to a point where I didn't care if they weren't perfect picks for hand-to-hand combat, and I played them both pretty consistently in that game. The first guest of the game, the Terminator, was also alright too, and we even got the Joker from DC Comics as the second guest, whose insane levels of brutality fit the Mortal Kombat style. Honestly, I almost put him as the entry, but you gotta give it up for the DLC guest released between the other 4 guests, Spawn, from the Todd McFarlane comic series of the same name. Spawn feels like he was almost tailor-made to be in Mortal Kombat. He's a former Marine who was betrayed by his team and killed, but he made a deal with the devil to be reborn as a Hellspawn superhero, still with his sense of morality. At first, I was like, but he's a superhero, doesn't he belong in NetherRealm's comic book fighting game? But after seeing Spawn in action, I understand where the fans were coming from. He's a Hellspawn who fights with demons and hellfire, so he fits in perfectly with all the hell creatures of the Mortal Kombat universe. He also fights with chains, another popular weapon in the series, and he's just brutally violent, which is always a crowd pleaser. The number of weapons he has is off the chart. Well, you can probably count them, but he has way more than his costume lets on. He can also shoot you quite a lot, so he doesn't have to worry about holding back when revealing the artillery behind the cape. And on that note, the cape. This convinced me of how good of a pick he was for Mortal Kombat. Spawn's cape is meant to be a part of his body, acting as both offense and defense, and it can change sizes depending on the situation, even turning into some of his physical weapons. The amount of fluidity and animation on the cape when he's fighting is amazing to look at, and you can tell the developers knew this was the most important object to base his moveset on. In my questionable guest video, I spoke about Spawn's history as a guest in Soul Calibur 2, where the graphics weren't quite ready for the details of his cape yet, so he went without it, making that 2003 guest appearance feel underwhelming. But with the technology of 2020, NetherRealm Studios fulfilled the potential of Spawn's fighting cape and made it dynamic, while still paying homage to his Soul Calibur origin with an intro line.
You've been to other dimensions.
Each has had its own injustices.
Maybe that's why my soul still burns.
And to top off why this is a great iteration of Spawn, he's voiced by Keith David, who voiced him in the HBO show and has that perfect deep voice that commands authority. Many may know him for his live action or animated roles, but I first heard Keith David's voice on Adult Swim bumpers back in the day. He was perfect for those. Anyway, for people who wanted Spawn in Mortal Kombat since the 90s, you were right. This was a great idea.
Spawn wins. Flawless victory.
For number 1, I picked a crossover that would be legendary in any game from the late 80s onwards. 2 franchises that have had staying power throughout generations. I'm talking about number 1, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Injustice 2, the DC Comics fighting game. The Injustice games follow an array of iconic DC Comics heroes and villains, with some obscure ones mixed in there, in an alternate universe with Evil Superman. And I know Evil Superman is overplayed at this point, but main universe good Superman is still in the first Injustice game, and in the end, the gameplay is fun and Superman still fights with Superman powers. With these games having the same developer as Mortal Kombat, NetherRealm Studios, they caught the guest character bug by Injustice 2. The first Injustice game just had Scorpion from Mortal Kombat as a guest for the easy crossover, but Injustice 2 unleashed the floodgates a bit with 4 guests. 2 of them were just Mortal Kombat characters, characters, so it was an evolution of the Scorpion guest appearance, but the other two were very interesting. The first guest after Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat was Hellboy from Dark Horse Comics, and if it wasn't for the Turtles taking the Injustice spot on this list, this is #1 material right here. Hellboy has to be the most popular hero from Dark Horse Comics. And I know I'm saying Dark Horse Comics as if it's as mainstream as Marvel or DC, but I think it's the next biggest comic publisher, which is a big deal for crossovers. Injustice even had Hellboy's 3D model fit his comic art style, so he may have not matched with the other Injustice models, but this was even better. Plus his moveset fits perfectly in Injustice. Hell powers and heavy artillery, those are two major paths you could go for attacks in this game. Also, his lore-accurate legs are smaller than I thought they'd be. But Hellboy was only one of 2 comic book heroes to make it in the game, or more, 1 of 5, since the final batch of DLC didn't just have one Ninja Turtle, it had the whole crew, but you still play as a single character with the ones that you're not playing as coming in for assists. Their movesets were somewhat interchangeable, with each turtle having their signature weapon replace certain attacks. You pick your turtle before the match, and the others come out for throws or certain attacks, and if you're playing as Leonardo, his special power calls out his bros even more, like having Michelangelo turn into a hit-and-run projectile. And of course, you can't have a super move without all 4 of them joining in for some turtle power. Their universal move is the Shellicopter, which turns them into a ball of violence for a second, where they retreat into their shell but fly at the opponent. They also have a rapid slash attack that works the same with their respective weapons. Just replace the sword with nunchaku or a staff depending on the turtle you're playing as. Raphael is the only one without the rapid motions, with more attacks setting up his size for his special character ability. Also, their combo strings differ, but the biggest difference between each turtle is their character power, and their good visual representations of their roles on the team. As mentioned, Leonardo, the leader, calls out his bros for assists, Donatello, the tech nerd, sets up traps that he invented to hinder the opponent, Michelangelo, the party dude, gets on his skateboard for some fast mix-up attacks, and Raphael, the hothead, does an auto combo that goes on longer the more size that you build up. And that's size as in the weapon, not size as in grow big. My only complaint, so to speak, is they use a lot of stock lines for intros. They have some fun interactions, but they repeat a lot of things to different characters, and it's clear that some opponents didn't have specific dialogue recorded for them, since they say very generic things to the turtles or just repeat things that they said to other characters. Though I like that they reused a line about Superman liking beef bourguignon and used it as a way to make him and Raphael get in an argument about pizza.
New York pizza's the best, am I right?
2 words. Beef bourguignon.
You really have lost your mind.
The voice actors weren't from any Turtle media in the past, but I like how they dialed up the New Yorker voice. In the end, great pick for a crossover, great execution, and a great choice as the #1 guest character in modern fighting games.
My turn!
Shell shot!
Donatello wins.
Where do you come from? Pizza.
Now, what did you think? Were all these characters welcomed guests, or should some of them had had their invitations revoked? And who are some of your favorite fighting game guest characters, whether I discussed them or not? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.